Okay, so yesterday we left off with the defeat of the Spanish Armada. This, of course, coming from the English, and as a result of that, this victory is going to fuel England and certainly set new heights. Strong government, popular monarch, religious unity, Protestant perspective, a golden age of literature. It's going to enter the scene, and then of course the British dominance at sea, which will last there again until the United States tops them in early 1900. So the impressive feat. Britain and Spain will finally sign a peace treaty in 1604. There again, great things is happening for the English, and this is going to set the stage, of course, for English exploration and the continuance of planning of English in America. This is sort of the characteristics of England on the eve of the empire. Let me raise this up just a little bit here. This is some colonization factors that is within England at the time. Now, 1604, as we've already said, the treaty with Spain is going to be signed. In the 1500s, there again, Britain's population was mushrooming. It was growing. There again, the enclosure system also was another situation that was motivating a lot of your English people to think about, a exploration to the New World. So there's a lot of push factors out of England. What is pushing them out? Well, for one, there again, there's the treaty with Spain. Everybody's talking about how, now we have exploration, motivation. Everybody's jumping on board with that. Population is starting to mushroom. The enclosure system is pushing a lot of people out. As far as England, this new policy of enclosure, or what we would refer to as fencing in land for farming, this meant there was less or no land for the poor. People who would often squat, basically take land that wasn't theirs, because of this fenced in system, it made it a little more difficult to be able to do that. The primogeniture law is another push factor. The tradition of primogeniture, what that means is the firstborn son inherits all the father's land. Therefore, younger sons of rich folk who couldn't inherit money tried their luck with fortunes elsewhere. And where is this place? Let's give America a shot. So that was a push factor out of the old world and into the new. Unemployment. The woolen districts fell upon hard times economically in England, so this meant that workers would lose their jobs. And so there is growing, restlessness in England, and people are starting to generate and form own ideas about, their existence in a new world. England will plant the Jamestown seedling, and that's going to take place in 1606. The Virginia Company received a charter, a document from King James I to make a settlement in the New World. So these joint stock companies, there again, are basically investors putting money into the company with hopes for a good return, being a forerunner of today's corporation. So they are funding these ventures. Now, don't think for 1 minute that England, there again, with Puritan and Pilgrim, is saying, no, don't leave. Oftentimes we have that misconstrued. All right, that's not what's taking place. No, they're encouraging these people to get out and explore. That's more resources for them. There again, they recognize they're still a product of England. So anything that falls into their hands is a product of England. So of course they're encouraging this. Joint stock companies usually did not exist long. Stockholders invested hopes to form the company, turn a profit, and then quickly sell for profit for a few years later. So there again, the joint stock companies would form there again to start generating exploration means. The Virginia Company of London was really the first or major joint stock company that got back, there again, that charter from King James I for settlement in 1606. It guaranteed settlers the same rights as Englishmen in Britain. Okay, so there again, some of the goals, there again, the encouragement to find gold, passage to Indies, it was a temporary stay. That wasn't something that was, going to have or be an expensive stay. Pressure on colonists to quickly strike it rich, there again, so that they can, start, getting a greater rate of return. So there again, why was the charter significant? There again, most important, as we've already said, it guaranteed the settlers' rights of Englishmen. Okay, so please know that. Okay, so we move on now to more information here as far as the Jamestown colony, and you will see that the Jamestown colony and eventually Maryland here are going to be your northernmost part of your southern colonies. But there again, this will be the developmental stage that will take place here as far as new English exploration. There again, these are just some more imagery that you see here. Eventually the Jamestown area, is going to move northward, and eventually we're going to have problems with the Powhatan Confederacy, and we will be involved for about a 30-year period in which we go into great detail as far as these notes, 30-year war on and off with the Powhatan Confederacy. And that's just a visual there just to see, of all the tribes that were centered in and around, and all of them were confederated together, and really was trying to be friendly, but some, of course, was hostile towards the Anglo for that particular time. So Jamestown colony, they have their back against the wall, no question about it. On May 24, 1607, 100 English settlers disembarked from their ship and founded Jamestown. Problems emerged, including the swampy site of Jamestown meant poor drinking water, mosquitoes causing malaria and yellow fever. That was a big problem. Another problem, men wasted time looking for gold rather than doing useful tasks such as digging wells, building shelter, and planting crops. It'd be a good idea, to sort of settle in. There were 0 women on the initial ship. I don't see really why that was a problem. No, I'm just kidding. So anyway, it didn't help that a supply ship shipwrecked in the Bahamas in 1609 either. So they had their back against the wall. It was hard enough to go and disembark and go across the Atlantic. I don't know if you've ever been to the Jamestown colony or not, but they have replicas of these ships that would, that people were on. And I don't see how they were able to do anything like that. That would be extreme misery, no question about that, as tight quarters as those ships were. But nevertheless, they made it work. So if you ever get an opportunity to go to Jamestown colony, do so. That is a very enjoyable trip, and it would be a good visual, no question about it. So they have their backs against the wall. There again, these 100 settlers here are mostly wealthy people, and they really, just to be straight up with you, don't have the inclination, really, or even the understanding of means of survival. So there again, they are used to sort of having everything at their disposal and not really used to having to, get busy and generating the mindset of survival. So it was a tough time for most. Now, one thing you do need to know is that the Jamestown colony did, and many of these early colonies, they flirted with communism. All right, you need to know that a lot of the idea was communism, that we're going to share the wealth. That's the way we're going to get things done. Productivity went on a halt. All right, and there's primary sources to back that up by these governors. You go look it up and you can see it, that communism was not going to work. People's productivity rate went down. The young person done just as much labor and got only as much there again as the older generation, who may not be able to do as much physically, but everybody got the same. The productivity level tanked. So they scrapped communism, they took on capitalism, and his productivity started to accelerate. So, I mean, their situation is they either get busy, as far as, productivity, working, and get going here, or it is going to be in a state of collapse. And yes, there are primary sources that will tell us that the notes say here that people were relegated to eating dogs, cats, rats, and mice, and even each other. I know when I was in Jamestown, they had just released a documentary about a younger girl who had passed away, who had come on years later, and she had passed away, and people were so hungry that they ate her remains. So there, yes, was primary sources will tell you, and new findings will tell us that there was cannibalism as well when push come to shove, and so certainly it just shows a state of desperation. By spring 1610, 60 people survived. By 1624, 10,000 immigrants. So you start to see an influx of people. Now, who is going to be noted for sort of helping these people get on track here? All right, Captain John Smith in 1608 he took over control and whipped the colonists into shape. And as you see in the back of the classroom here, his infamous statement, "He who does not work, neither shall he eat." All right, has nothing to do with promoting communism. That statement is all about capitalism. So there's proof right there that capitalism was going to be the extreme motive to get people up and busy. John Smith at one point would be kidnapped by local Indians and forced into a mock execution by the chief Powhatan, and had been saved by Powhatan's daughter Pocahontas. The act was meant to show that Powhatan wanted peaceful relations with the colonists. John Smith's main contribution was that he gave order and discipline. You do need to know that about John Smith, highlighted by his no work, no food policy. Okay, please remember that. Colonists there again had to eat cats, dogs, rats, even other people. So there again, you see it there. One fellow wrote of eating powdered wife. Fancy that. Sounds good. Anyway, finally in 1610, a relief party headed by Lord Delaware arrived to alleviate the suffering. So they were waiting on these ships to bring, of course, extra supplies. But 1625, out of the original overall total of 8,000 would-be settlers, only 1,200 had survived during this time period. So it there again was referred to as the starving time, in Jamestown colony. So much for the idea, exploration and fun and so forth. They get a reality check, and boy is it a reality check. All right, here's some imagery that you see here. There again, most of these men were gentlemen. Gentlemen in England were not expected to work, so they lived on family money. So there again, you need to be aware that the work ethic was a little halted. All right, eventually we're going to see some cultural clash here with the Anglo-Powhatan Wars, especially in the Chesapeake region. At first, Powhatan possibly considered the new colonists potential allies and tried to be friendly with them, but as time passed and colonists raided Indian food supplies, relations would go in a form of deterioration, and eventually war would occur. The first Anglo-Powhatan War ended in 1614 with a peace settlement sealed by the marriage of Pocahontas to colonist John Rolfe. Not John Smith, John Rolfe. Rolfe and Pocahontas nurtured a favorable flavor of sweet tobacco, and it would be safe to say that the production of tobacco would be the staple crop that would be able to save the Jamestown colony, as well as many other colonies that had the particular soul for tobacco production. 8 years later, in 1622, the Indians would strike again with a series of attacks that would lay 347 settlers, including John Rolfe, dead. So that was some of the notables of the First Anglo-Powhatan War. The Second Anglo-Powhatan War would begin in 1644 and end in 46 and effectively banish the Chesapeake Indians from their ancestral land. After the settlers began to grow their own food, the Indians to them were useless and were therefore banished. Three things that would lead to the demise of the Powhatan Confederacy, and you need to know this: disease, disorganization, and disposability. Okay, how is that for alliteration? So this would end the Powhatan Confederacy in 1644. 1689, English view of Powhatans as extinct. So one thing that you are going to see that is a line of symmetry when we talk about the colonists and their association with American Indians. The big word that you need to be associated with in your writing is encroachment, all right? Because that is one thing that they all have in common, is encroachment upon the American Indian land and their tribes. All right, so 1612 is going to roll on. John Rolfe perfected the tobacco growing. There again, the native tobacco of Virginia was not overly sought after. It was a Caribbean-based tobacco that was brought in that I think maybe Barbados, I want to say. I'm not for sure about that, but it was a transplant that was brought in. That was the sweeter variety that was the most successful. But anyway, tobacco put Virginia on a firm economic foundation. Okay, so Jamestown gold is found in tobacco. Rolfe's sweet tobacco was sought as a cash crop by Europe. So Jamestown had found its gold. And what is this going to do? Tobacco is going to create a greed for land, since it heavily depleted the soil and ruined the land. Okay, so make sure that you know that tobacco, there again, had the tendency to butcher the soil. Tobacco was hurriedly planted in the streets of Jamestown, between graves, anywhere that it could be planted. They would take the initial means to do so because they knew this was money in their pockets. Promoted a plantation system, a demand for labor supply, but the question is who is going to be the lucky person to work these plantation systems? There again, this brings us to, I think, if I'm not mistaken, well, we talk a little bit more. Here's just another imagery here of John Rolfe and his commercial tobacco growing begins that you see here. There again, tobacco is going to keep the element of survival here. Okay, so here's some imagery that you see here. There again, here's your plantations, large plantations, 100 acres, widely spread apart, 5 miles that you see here. There's social and economic problems with that. Okay, you're spreading people out. All right, your elites are going to have the tendency to reside in one particular area, whereas your frontiersmen are going to be in other areas, and eventually what you're going to do is create a class system, and it's going to break down, and it's going to cause some rebellions and so forth, and we'll get into that just a little bit later. But yes, it does cause social and economic problems. All right, here's another map that you see here, settled at 1650 and in yellow, and settled by 1700 in green here. Okay. So you see there again, growth and development taking place. Now, we're going to go back and answer this question wherever it was, right here. All right, who is going to be the one, of course, that's going to be for the plantation system, and who is going to meet the demand for the labor supply? It is going to be, at first, your indentured servant. Okay, some of you all may have worked on that contract yesterday, so you already have, reasonable knowledge as far as the, indentured servant, and that's good. But anyway, they're going to, of course, fit the bill for that. Okay, so there again, if you benefited as far as through finance, and you had a pretty strong economic background, you could, make your way to the Americas and obtain land through a head right system. Each Virginian got 50 acres for each person whose passage, of course, that they paid. So there again, you could make your way into the New World, and you could already have, land at your possession. Now, if you couldn't afford it, of course, then you would have to, engage in an indentured contract. All right, and there again, your work program would last as much as 5 to 7 years. Promise freedom dues or promised a tract of land. In the meantime, you were forbidden to marry, and from 1610 to 1614, as you see here, only 1 in 10 outlived their indentured contract. So that is, a pretty tall tale sign there that, this is a difficult situation, and you're really going to have to be, physically speaking, top notch to be able, to outlive that contract, in which only a few were able to do. In certain cases, the argument would be safe to say that, the slave may have had it a little better than the indentured servant. There again, a person who purchases the slave, of course, is going to take care of that slave, make sure the health of that slave is what it needs to be, because of course that's what they paid for. As brutal as it sounds, absolutely, but it is the fact. The indentured servant was kind of, on his own, not having really the best shelter or the best clothing or the best food. No one was responsible for that, so it did make it a little more difficult, that's for sure. But anyway, that would be who at first would meet the demands of the labor supply. Now, eventually the indentured servant program is going to come to a screeching halt because of a class conflict. We'll talk more about that tomorrow as far as the notes. All right, this is just another imagery as far as the population of Virginia. So you see, a huge explosion as time progresses. All right. From a political perspective, very important that you're able to see, the beginnings of self-government in the early colonies. So there again, you see the Virginia House of Burgesses. So they're already flirting or introducing themselves with representative self-government. Okay, and I don't know if you've ever been to the Virginia House of Burgesses, but if you ever get the opportunity to go, it is, is really enjoyable, and it's very interesting if you like history like I do. But anyway, the House of Burgesses was the first representative assembly, and there again, kind of had an upper house and a lower house. There again, sort of is a mirror image of what we have today in U.S. Congress with the House of Representatives and the Senate. So this representative self-government was born in Virginia when in 1619 settlers created the House of Burgesses, the committee to work out local issues. This set America on a self-ruled pathway. Okay, so make sure that you know that about the Virginia House of Burgesses. 1624, James I would revoke the charter of bankrupt Virginia Company, made Virginia a royal colony. Now remember, a royal colony is a colony where that the governor over the colony is appointed by the king. So a governor is not really necessarily meeting the demands of the people, he more is meeting the demands of the king. So there again, they don't feel like that they've got a governor who is working on their behalf, and he distrusts, the king is going to distrust the Burgess because he says it's nothing more than a seminary of sedition, basically a coalition of people who are representing the colony who are basically against the king and is unwilling to comply to what the king, may manifest or may make known. So that's why he sort of distrusted that, and that's what motivated him to sort of end the Virginia Company and put his thumb that much the more on the colonies by making it a royal colony. Very important that you're able to see that. Okay, so we come to a stopping point there, and tomorrow we will talk about every vegetarian's nightmare in Nathaniel Bacon. Yes, Nathaniel Bacon. All right, so that should give you ample notes for the day. And we will probably conclude this set of notes for Chapter 2 as early as tomorrow, giving you Friday, if you are here at school, time to finish up any assignments or work on assignments.